June 15, 1944, Saipan, Mariana Islands. The war in the Pacific had reached a turning point. As the U.S. Navy stormed ashore and Japanese defenses crumbled, a new weapon waited quietly on the runway. A machine so advanced it looked like something from the future. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress, 141 feet wide, for right, are 3350 engines, capable of carrying 20,000 pounds of bombs over 3,000 miles, was about to change the face of war. Its aluminum skin shimmered in the island heat as crews prepared for their first mission over Japan itself. No fighter, no flak gun could reach this high. At 30,000 feet, the B-29 was untouchable. Hours later, in the night skies over Kyushu, Japanese civilians looked up and saw glittering dots, silent and steady, moving faster than anything they'd ever known. Then, the horizon burst open. Entire neighborhoods vanished beneath cascading fire, a storm born not from the sea or sky, but from American steel and science. "We thought the gods had come to punish us," one survivor recalled. From this moment, the war entered its final, most terrible chapter, one fought not between armies, but between technology and humanity. Before we descend into the firestorms that followed, the missions, the men, and the cities erased from the map, subscribe, share, and stay with us as we reveal the weapon that made Japan look to the heavens in fear. The B-29 Superfortress, fire from 30,000 feet. February 18, 1944, Wichita, Kansas. In a sprawling Boeing plant humming with steel and sweat, the sound of progress drowned out everything else. Thousands of American workers, men, women, and even teenagers, assembled what would become the most powerful bomber of the war, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. It was a machine born not from desperation, but from innovation, the result of a $3 billion project, the most expensive in the war after the atomic bomb. Designed for range, altitude, and power, the B-29 was unlike anything that had ever flown. With four Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, pressurized cabins, remote-control gun turrets, and the capacity to fly over 30,000 feet at 350 miles per hour, it was built to take the war directly to Japan, something no Allied aircraft had yet achieved. But before it could rain destruction from the sky, it nearly tore itself apart on the ground. The engines overheated, fires broke out midair, and test pilots risked everything to keep the dream alive. Inside the cockpit of one prototype, Colonel Leonard Harmon scribbled in his log, "If this plane works, it will end the war. If it doesn't, it will end us." April 1944, China-Burma-India Theater. The first B-29s, assigned to XX Bomber Command under General Curtis E. LeMay, arrived at dusty airfields in India. The mission, Operation Matterhorn, launched the world's first strategic bombing campaign against Japan. But there was a problem. The planes couldn't reach Japan from India. So the Americans built forward bases in Chengdu, China, supplied only by treacherous airlifts over the Himalayas, known as the Hump. Each gallon of fuel burned required 10 more to get it there. Mechanics worked in monsoon mud, often barefoot, repairing engines that melted under the tropical heat. June 15, 1944, the first raid on Japan. At 3 a.m., 98 B-29s roared off runways in India and China, bound for Yoda on Japan's Kyushu Island, 1,500 miles away. It was the first time since the Doolittle raid of 1942 that Japan's homeland would face American bombs. In Tokyo, air raid sirens screamed. Anti-aircraft gunners scrambled, searching the clouds for intruders. But the B-29s were too high, their silver bellies glinting in the moonlight far beyond the reach of flak or Zero fighters. Only one bomber was lost to mechanical failure. The rest returned home with film reels showing plumes of fire and smoke curling over Yoda's Imperial Ironworks. Though the physical damage was small, the psychological impact was immense. Japan had believed itself untouchable, protected by the vast Pacific and divine destiny. But now, a new kind of enemy had appeared, one that came not from the sea, but from the heavens themselves. In the days that followed, Japanese newspapers downplayed the attack, calling it an isolated raid. But citizens whispered a different truth. They had seen something impossible. Bombers that came from nowhere, struck without warning, and vanished into clouds. Meanwhile, in Washington, General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces, studied reconnaissance photos from Yalta and made a single note in the margin. It works. Move them to the Marianas. That order would change everything. August 1944, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The U.S. Marines had captured the Mariana Islands after brutal fighting, giving the B-29s a new home, just 1,500 miles from Tokyo. On those freshly built coral runways, rows of superfortresses lined up under the tropical sun, each named and painted by their crews. Dauntless Dottie, the Dragon Lady, the big-time operator. Ground crews called them Silver Cities. The Japanese called them the demons from the sky. From these islands, the real campaign was about to begin, one that would turn the night skies of Japan into oceans of fire. March 9th, 1945, Tinian Island, Mariana Islands. The tropical air was heavy, hot, and electric with tension. On the coral runways of Northfield, 334B, 29 superfortresses stood in formation, engines rumbling, bomb bays open. Inside each aircraft, men performed final checks in silence, their faces lit by red cockpit lamps. The mission orders were simple, but terrifying in scope. Primary target, Tokyo. Altitude, 5,000 to 9,000 feet. Load, incendiaries only. General Curtis E. LeMay, commander of XXI Bomber Command, had changed the rules of war. High-altitude precision bombing had failed. Winds and weather scattered bombs harmlessly into the countryside. Now, LeMay ordered his crews to fly low, strip their bombers of defensive guns to save fuel, and attack at night with one goal: to burn the heart of Japan to the ground. At 5:56 p.m., the first B-29, the lead slug, lifted off from Tinian, followed by wave after wave. 166 from Guam, 107 from Saipan, and 61 from Tinian itself. By nightfall, the formation stretched for over 100 miles across the Pacific sky. Inside the lead bomber, Major Robert Morgan, veteran of the Memphis Belle, stared at the black horizon. Below lay Tokyo, a city of 7 million, built almost entirely of wood and paper. His bombardier, Lieutenant Raymond Ray Albright, glanced at his maps and whispered, "One drop and it'll all go up." March 10th, 1945, 12:08 a.m. Tokyo, Japan. The first incendiary clusters fell from 7,000 feet. 69 napalm bomblets, each no larger than a milk bottle, but capable of igniting at 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. They burst open like blossoms of fire, spreading trails of flaming gel through narrow alleys and wooden rooftops. Within minutes, the capital became a living inferno. The flames joined, multiplied, and devoured everything in their path. Wind currents whipped through the grid-like streets, creating firestorms so intense that asphalt melted and rivers boiled. Oxygen vanished. People collapsed where they stood, suffocated by the heat. From the gunner's turret of B-29 boxcar, Sergeant Edward Blankenship looked down and whispered over the intercom, "My God, it's the whole city." On the ground, Tokyo. 17-year-old Sato Aiko, an air raid volunteer, ran through the chaos clutching a pail of sand. She had been trained to extinguish incendiaries with wet blankets, but the fire came faster than thought. She reached for her mother's hand and felt only heat. "The sky turned red," she later wrote. "We cannot tell if it was day or night." By 2:30 a.m., entire wards, Koto, Chua, and Sumida, were erased from the map. The temperature on the ground reached over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Some fire breaks, created by the Japanese government, became traps. As civilians crowded into open areas, the flames raced around them in rings. The crews above saw none of it clearly, only a glowing vortex that stretched for miles, swallowing their bomb patterns. Radio operators called it the furnace. Pilots could feel the heat rising thousands of feet into the air, buffeting their aircraft. By 4 a.m., the last wave turned home. Over 16 square miles of Tokyo had been obliterated. More than 100,000 people were dead. 1 million were left homeless. It was and remains the deadliest air raid in human history, surpassing even Dresden. When General LeMay received the mission report, he said nothing. He merely removed his cap, rubbed the sweat from his forehead, and muttered, "If we lose this war, we'll all be tried as war criminals." In Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito stood at his palace window as smoke drifted across the imperial moat. For the first time in the war, Japan's divine city had burned. He turned to his aide and said softly, "Tell the people to endure the unendurable." March 11th, 1945, Tinian. The returning bombers landed one by one, their engines crackling, their fuselages streaked with soot. Crews stepped out into the dawn, victorious, exhausted, and haunted. The radio tower reported success, but no one cheered. From that night onward, Japan's skies would never again be dark. March 12, 1945, Tinian Island, Mariana Islands. The air crews of the 73rd Bomb Wing stood in the pre-dawn humidity, listening as General Curtis LeMay outlined the next phase. Tokyo had burned, but Japan still fought. The plan now was systematic annihilation. Industrial hubs, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, would be erased one by one. "We will destroy their ability to wage war," LeMay said flatly. "No factories, no army. No cities, no resistance." That afternoon, B-29s from the 314th Bomb Wing began loading napalm clusters. Mechanics stripped down the planes for speed, gun turrets removed, armor plating discarded. They were now sleek, silver Predators built for fire. March 13th, 1945, Nagoya, Japan. The first wave crossed the coast at midnight. Inside the cockpit of B-29 city of Springfield, Captain John Brock adjusted his oxygen mask as tracer rounds from anti-aircraft batteries clawed at the darkness. The city below, home to Mitsubishi Aircraft Works, was the beating heart of Japan's fighter production, the birthplace of the A6M0. At 12:23 a.m., Brock's bombardier released his payload, M47 napalm bombs and M69 clusters, raining over Nagoya's factory district. The fires ignited instantly, spreading across rail yards and residential zones. On the ground, factory worker Fujimoto Haru emerged from a shelter to see her neighborhood, Atsuta, engulfed. She had built 0 engines by hand. Now the machines she helped assemble had become her executioners. The air was filled with glowing paper, she wrote later, and beneath it, people were no longer moving. By dawn, 1/4 of Nagoya lay in ruins. But the American crews returned again the next night and the next. The goal was not destruction alone, but continuity of fire. March 17th, 1945, Kobe, Japan. Wind funneled between the coastal mountains and the sea. Perfect firestorm conditions. That night, 331 B-29s from Guam and Tinian descended on the port city. Each bomber carried nearly 7 tons of incendiaries. At 10 p.m., the first flames erupted across Kobe's shipyards and docks, consuming warehouses, oil tanks, and fishing districts. The heat rose to such intensity that metal shutters glowed red before collapsing inward. From the air, co-pilot Lieutenant Richard Weston whispered into his intercom, "We can see the fire reflecting off the ocean." Below, a young naval cadet named Tanaka Ryoichi tried to reach the port to help extinguish the flames. He and his unit dragged fire hoses through debris, but the napalm was alive, clinging to the ground like molten glass. When water hit it, it spread. "It did not die," Tanaka later said. "It grew stronger when we fought it." By dawn, 90% of Kobe's commercial district was gone. Nearly 100,000 buildings had been destroyed. May 1945, Osaka and Yokohama. The bombers came again, wave after wave, night after night. Osaka, the second largest city in Japan, suffered its first massive raid on March 13th and again on June 1st, when 450 B-29s leveled its industrial zone. The Osaka arsenal, once producing artillery shells for the Imperial Army, ceased to exist. Yokohama, Japan's great port city, burned on May 29th, when 517 B-29s dropped over 3,200 tons of incendiaries. More than 44% of the city vanished in just a few hours. Witnesses later said the sea itself seemed to catch fire as oil tanks exploded along the docks. Inside B-29 Enola Gay, before its fateful atomic mission months later, pilot Colonel Paul Tibbets flew that night's Yokohama run. In his log, he wrote, "The target glowed like a furnace. We flew through smoke so dense it stung our eyes even at 8,000 feet. Japanese response was desperate. The Nakajima Ki 84 Height fighters scrambled to intercept the high-flying bombers, but fuel shortages and radar failures crippled defenses. Anti-aircraft batteries ran out of shells. Civilians dug trenches, soaked straw mats, and prayed. By summer, Japan's cities had become wastelands, blackened shells where life once thrived. From Hiroshima to Fukuoka, smoke rose like dark mountains into the sky. Even Emperor Hirohito, usually insulated from the horrors, could no longer ignore the reality. He visited the burned ruins of Tokyo in June 1945, his motorcade moving through streets of ash and silence. He whispered to his aide, "Is this the empire I was sworn to protect?" For the men of the 20th Air Force, victory fell hollow. Each night mission blurred into the next, a rhythm of takeoff, fire, and return. Inside their aircraft, the scent of smoke and fuel clung to their uniforms. Many could not sleep. Some wrote letters they never sent. The B-29 campaign had become more than a mission. It was the slow death of a nation from above, and the men who carried it out were burning, too, in ways no fire could extinguish. June 1945, Kagoshima Prefecture, Kyushu. The air smelled of rain and burnt soil. On the runways of Kanoya Air Base, a group of young pilots stood in silence beside their aircraft. Mitsubishi A6 M0s, stripped of armor and painted with the red Hinamara sun. Each man wore a white scarf tied by his mother, a family charm tucked under his flight suit. They were not preparing for defense. They were preparing to die. The Kamikaze Special Attack Corps, born months earlier during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, was now Japan's last weapon. With the American B-29 raids erasing entire cities, the Imperial High Command turned to what they called the Divine Wind. At 5 a.m., Lieutenant Yukio Seiki, commander of the 201st Air Group, stood before his men. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the truth. "If our death can delay the enemy's victory by even one day," he said, "it will be an honor for our ancestors." Nearby, maintenance crews prepared the aircraft. A single 500-kilogram bomb bolted beneath each fuselage. There was no plan to return. June 7, 1945, Okinawa, Japan. The Battle of Okinawa had raged for over 2 months. American Marines of the 6th Division clawed their way up ridges under torrential rain, while Japanese soldiers, entrenched in limestone caves, refused to yield. The roar of naval artillery mixed with the drone of aircraft. Above, kamikaze planes from Kyushu screamed out of the clouds, diving straight into American destroyers and carriers. On board the USS Bunker Hill, pilot Ensign Joseph R. McGraw watched in horror as 2 Zeros struck the deck in rapid succession. The resulting explosions killed over 390 men in seconds. Fire engulfed the carrier. Molten steel dripped into the sea. Men threw themselves overboard to escape the flames. "They came out of the sun," McGraw recalled. "There was no time to breathe." For the Americans, the kamikazes were a new kind of terror, human weapons that turned the sky into a graveyard. For the Japanese pilots, it was something else entirely, a final act of sacrifice for a war already lost. In Tokyo, even as the capital lay in ruins, Emperor Hirohito convened his ministers inside the Imperial Palace bunker. Reports from Okinawa confirmed Japan's armies were shattered. The home islands were next. Food was scarce. Fuel was gone. General Anami Korechika, the Minister of War, bowed low. "We must fight on," he said. "Every man, woman, and child will resist." But others, like Foreign Minister Togo Shigenori, saw the futility. "To continue is to destroy Japan itself," he whispered. Still, the kamikaze missions continued. From June to July 1945, over 1,900 Japanese pilots flew suicide sorties against Allied fleets off Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands. Fewer than 15% reached their targets, but those who did inflicted staggering damage. June 22, 1945, Okinawa falls. After 82 days of hell, American forces finally declared victory. Over 12,000 U.S. troops have been killed, and nearly 100,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead, many choosing suicide over surrender. The civilian toll was unimaginable. Over 150,000 Okinawan lives lost, half the island's population. As the surviving Marines raised their flag over the shattered cliffs of Mabuni, the Pacific winds carried the faint smell of smoke and salt, the scent of victory and loss. That same day, in a dimly lit control room on Tinian Island, General Carl Spaatz, commander of U.S. Strategic Air Forces, signed the order to escalate the bombing once again. The incendiary campaign had burned Japan's cities to ashes, but not its will. Now, the Americans would take to the skies again with a new directive. Target: remaining industrial centers. Objective: complete destruction. In Japan's countryside, civilians dug trenches and practiced with bamboo spears. Children were taught to charge tanks with explosives strapped to their chests. The imperial rescript declared, 100 million hearts beating as one, ready to die for the emperor. But beneath that defiance lay something darker: resignation. The fires had consumed not just homes, but hope. July 24, 1945, Tinian Island, Mariana Islands. Under the harsh tropical sun, a new kind of B-29 stood waiting on the runway. Its polished aluminum fuselage bore no name, no mission insignia, only a cryptic code: silver plate. Inside a sealed hangar nearby, U.S. Army technicians from the 509th Composite Group worked in silence around a massive steel sphere. It was unlike anything the airmen had seen. A 10,000-pound bomb nicknamed Little Boy. Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, commanding officer of the 509th, gathered his men for briefing. The air smelled of oil and secrecy. "We're about to end this war," he said quietly. "But history may never forgive us." No one knew the target yet, only that it was in Japan, and that when the weapon was dropped, the world would change forever. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan. 8:15 a.m. The morning was clear, the sky blue. Children walked to school, soldiers drilled near the river, and workers headed to the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries shipyard. Air raid sirens had sounded briefly at 7:09, but were cleared minutes later. Only 3 aircraft had been spotted, not enough to trigger an alarm. At 8:09, radar operators saw the lone B-29 approaching from the south, Enola Gay. Inside, Bombardier Major Thomas Farabee steadied the Norden sight as the city's T-shaped WWII bridge came into view. "Target in sight," he reported. At 8:15 and 17 seconds, the bomb bay doors opened. Little Boy fell for 43 seconds. Then light. Witnesses described it as a flash whiter than the sun. For one endless instant, Hiroshima ceased to exist as matter, only energy. Buildings within a mile of ground zero vaporized. The blast wave shredded everything outward for miles. Windows shattered in distant towns. 2,000 feet below, the center of the city reached 5,400 degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. Stone melted. Shadows burned into walls. Pilot Paul Tibbets banked sharply, his crew stunned into silence. "My God," whispered co-pilot Robert Lewis. "What have we done?" On the ground, Hiroshima. Nurse Sasaki Sadako, working at the Red Cross Hospital, was thrown to the floor. When she rose, there were no walls, only wind and screams. People were walking, she recalled, but their skin was hanging from their arms like ribbons. The mushroom cloud rose 60,000 feet into the sky, a pillar of dust and fire visible from 200 miles away. By nightfall, over 70,000 people were dead. Tens of thousands more would die in the following weeks from burns and radiation sickness. August 7, 1945, Washington, D.C. President Harry S. Truman addressed the nation. "We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands of young Americans." But in Tokyo, the imperial cabinet fell into chaos. Communication with Hiroshima was cut off. Reports came in as whispers. A single bomb, the city destroyed. August 9, 1945, Nagasaki, Japan. The Americans struck again. At 11:02 a.m., B-29 Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, released the second atomic bomb, Fat Man. The blast leveled the Urakami Valley, destroying the Mitsubishi Arms plant and the Cathedral District. The mushroom cloud reached 45,000 feet. 40,000 died instantly. Thousands more were buried alive. Japanese Army Dr. Nagai Takashi, himself wounded, wandered through the ruins of Nagasaki Medical College. He later wrote, "I saw my country crucified upon a cross of fire." Above the devastation, the bombers turned for home. Below them, the Empire of Japan was in ruins, 66 cities destroyed by fire, 2 by atomic light. August 10, 1945, Tokyo. Emperor Hirohito convened the Imperial Council in the underground shelter of the palace. The ministers were divided: surrender or annihilation. General Anami Korechika pressed his hand to his sword. "I will fight until the last breath of the last Japanese." But Hirohito interrupted, his voice calm, almost serene. "The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. We must endure the unendurable." August 15, 1945, Japan surrenders. At noon, radios across the nation crackled to life. Hirohito's voice, the first ever heard by his people, spoke the words that ended the war. "The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. We must bear the unbearable." In the ruins of Tokyo, people knelt in silence. Some wept. Some simply stared at the sky, the same sky that had brought destruction from 30,000 feet. And on Tinian, the men of the 509th sat in stunned quiet. There was no cheering, no victory songs. Only the sound of wind moving across empty runways. The war was over, but the world would never be the same. September 2, 1945, Tokyo Bay. Morning light shimmered across still water as the battleship USS Missouri anchored near the smoldering remnants of the Japanese capital. The sky was silent. No aircraft, no bombs, only the hum of distant engines and the faint cries of gulls. Aboard the Missouri, representatives of the Empire of Japan, dressed in black morning coats, stepped forward. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, walking with a cane and the weight of defeat, placed his signature on the instrument of surrender at 9:04 a.m. Opposite him stood General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces. His expression was solemn, not triumphant. "We are gathered here," MacArthur said, "to conclude a solemn act of reconciliation, not for vengeance, but for peace." With that pen stroke, World War II ended. The dead of Tokyo, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Okinawa, and Iwo Jima became silent witnesses to humanity's darkest century and its most terrible lesson. In Hiroshima, the survivors, the hibakusha, wandered through a landscape that no longer had color. Burnt trees stood like shadows. The rivers carried ash instead of water. Nurse Sasaki Sadako, who had survived the initial blast, began folding paper cranes years later in her hospital bed, one for every wish she had left for peace. She died at 12 years old. In Nagasaki, Dr. Nagai Takashi, his hair turned white from radiation, wrote from the ruins of his clinic, "We who remain must speak for the dead, that the world may not burn again." In America, pilots of the 509th sat in quiet contemplation. Some returned to farms, others to factories. But many never spoke of Tinian again. Paul Tibbets refused to attend commemorations, saying only, "I did my duty. I have no regrets, only memories." In Tokyo, General Curtis LeMay began Japan's post-war air defense rebuilding, training the very people he had once burned. The irony was not lost on him. "If we'd lost," he once admitted, "I suppose I would have been tried as a war criminal." By the winter of 1945, the Allied occupation had begun. American soldiers walked the same streets they once bombed. They handed out chocolate to starving children. Factories that had forged Zero fighters now built sewing machines and radios. The Emperor, once worshipped as divine, became a mortal symbol of survival, quiet, distant, and haunted. His image appeared in photographs beside General MacArthur, a sign that Japan's gods had yielded to men. The world, for the first time, had seen atomic light, and it could never close its eyes again. The age of total war had ended. The Cold War had begun. Across the Pacific, the ruins were rebuilt, but the memories endured. Burned walls in Hiroshima, twisted metal in Nagasaki, the charred stones of Tokyo still faintly stained by ash. History had turned a page, but the ink was blood. If you're watching this, remember, this story is not just about machines or strategy. It's about people, men and bombers praying to survive the night, and families beneath those bombers praying for dawn. From the Pacific's Coral Islands to the heart of Japan's cities, the B-29 Superfortress reshaped the sky and humanity's conscience. Every invention that gives us power also gives us choice. And every war reminds us what happens when choice becomes destruction. Remember Hiroshima. Remember Tokyo. Remember the fire from 30,000 feet. And may we never let it fall again.